I grown up in a city where I had this impression and this feeling that in this geographical area there were two important civilizations. The Assyrian civilization, the beginning of history, as they say, the beginning of writings, the beginning of agriculture, which is on the east coast of Tigris, and the west coast, the city of Mosul, the emergence of Islamic civilization there. I grown up with this idea, a city full of history, always looking at what happened back in the past, who came here, the travelers who visited the city. We have like everything, like all there. Like when you say, well, the oldest thing is in Mosul, the first thing happened in Mosul, with this like idea, but this kind of like changed later. I would say like the first sense of history I had, it was 2003. It's the first few moments when the Americans came in Mosul. They arrived there, it was April 10th. It was Friday, because they arrived in Baghdad 9th of April, but next day they arrived in Mosul. Something similar happened in the First World War. They arrived 17th in Baghdad and 18th in Mosul. So there's always one day before the two occupations. The shock I had at that moment is how people changed their attitude, their mentality, especially the leading people, the elites. One of them was a preacher in the mosque who was trying to defend the regime because he thought that the regime is still in power. But after he saw the Americans, it was a Humvee with 4 soldiers. I think one of them was in the high ranks as a commander in the front seat, and was accompanied with a tribal leader. And once they stopped by the mosque, this preacher changed completely from defending the regime to shouting against the regime. So it was a shock, and this is how it led me to study the history. And at the end, it took me to study the French occupation on Egypt, because I could only find answers in what Al-Jabarti wrote about the French occupation. So, like, this is the way I lived in the city, because it's full of history.
Growing up, did you have a sense of the past being part of the present, this very deep, complicated past, that it was, or was it only as you...
We always lived in the past. We always lived in the past.
So, and if you were aware of both the sort of deep history of the city...
My grandmother always used to tell me, like, we are Ottomans. I mean, I wrote an article about this. We are Ottomans. Come on, Grandma, what do you mean we are Ottomans? My father talking about his grandfather's certification of birth, which is Ottoman. They always have examples to give you when Mosul like face kind of like troubles, especially like recently what happened to the city. They say, well, we defeated Nader Shah in 1744 in his siege of Mosul. When they say like Mosul is suffering now from the lack of food, etc., they say we will survive this because we did in 1917, because Mosul had this like famine and other problems.
And is that unique? I mean, is there a way, is Mosul different than other cities in the way
I believe
its history is sort of part of its present?
I mean, I believe this makes Mosul a unique city in terms of history, society. Let's go back to what Ibn Jubayr, the traveler who visited Mosul, I think in the 600 or 6th century of Hijri, when he said like this city is huge and it's kind of like well prepared for anything to happen. They also say like history passed here more than any other city. And like the fascinating thing about this is these kind of conversations is not just in the university or in like in a historical atmosphere or where you discuss with experts. This is the daily conversation you would have with people who even never had knowledge of like history or never received education. This is like the oral history they received from their parents, from their friends. Like I know that when I used to travel with my father from Mosul to Baghdad, the whole conversation is about the history of Mosul.
And in 2003, at the time of the American invasion, did people think about that through a kind of historical lens, through sort of, this has happened before, or?
Yeah, absolutely they did. They, like, as a historian who is now studying the history of Mosul, this is part of what I do, is how the people perceive their history, how they wrote their history. After 2003, going back to history in Mosul was kind of like an act of protection or act of defense, trying to defend the people. I know that now in Mosul, and even back to 2003, there is something growing up is history or understanding history or getting knowledge of history is a protection.
Against the erasure of history, or? Against
the different narratives that are being imposed on the city. Because even the Americans, when they came to Mosul, they also, it's not only ISIS that brought its own narrative. You know, whenever there is someone in power, the first thing they do is imposing their own narrative so they can control not only the current moment, but also the future. So when the Americans came, and this is the argument that is like going on now in Iraq, is that the Americans brought the sectarianism to Iraq. They didn't bring it actually. They just approached history through the eye of sectarianism.
I mean, it seems in this moment that within a sort of global political arena, there is such a sort of push to sort of fan the flames of sectarianism for strategic purposes that has really, I mean, throughout the Middle East. I lived in Egypt, and when I first went to Egypt, you know, no one thought about the Shia and some conflict with the Shia. A few years later, there was like, everyone was on guard for the dangerous Shia, even though there were hardly any Shia there. So this has been, you know, this has been sort of pushed and promoted for reasons that we know about. But thinking historically, are there any ways that one can think about, does history offer us any other ways to sort of think about how to live together and how we might sort of in the present address some of these tensions without what seems to be their ongoing and necessary intensification?
I mean, let me say it this way. We are now witnessing the decline, not the end, but the decline of the Sunni order or the Sunni political Islam. It was like heavily damaged by the so-called Islamic State. Kind of like they, no one have done such thing to the political Islam than what ISIS did. They kind of like went deep into the roots of the political Islam and like cut it off. But this doesn't mean the end of the Sunni order, or it doesn't mean the end of sectarianism itself. It's just like a stage of transformation into the Sunni Islam, into its political perspective. It's now more to do with the rising of the Shia Islam. They have the power in Iraq, and because of the like importance place of Iraq within its regional area, it has to do with sectarianism, because Iraq is being like a tool by Iran, and you have a war in Yemen. It's also between Shia and Sunni. Saudi Arabia is being a representative or producing itself as a representative Sunni Islam. But here we are not talking about the Sunni Islam that ISIS believed in, or at least organizations like Muslim Brotherhood, other organizations. You have Taliban, you have Qaeda, AK in general, the mother. All these different groups, they are still believing in the importance of bringing Sunnism back. And we can see this also in recent messages from Zawahiri, how he is calling the jihadists to think again or to rethink their position. But what has changed is
in relation to sectarianism?
Yeah.
And what is he saying? I'm not.
He's like AK had this very long history of arguing the Al Qaeda in Iraq that stopped doing sectarianism, not because they like the Shia or they just they don't want to kill them, but they wanted the AK to focus more on their main goal, which is like attacking the West. And ISIS had different approach. No, we want to kill more Shia, so we raise the sectarianism and the Sunnis will have this protection. And it goes back to what we discussed when the Sunnis found kind of like a protection in ISIS. They were working in this area. But now they are changing this. Jihadism itself is in a transformation from political Islam or using jihadism as a tool to bring back Sunni order again, to rethink their approach of doing jihad.
I see. In less sectarian terms?
In less sectarian terms, because they are taking their battle from fighting against Shia to fighting the regimes in the...
And what do you remember, like, growing up about sectarianism? Well, how did you encounter it as a child?
My name caused me problems. I still have this problem with my name. My name is Omar. It's the name of the second caliph. It was in the heart of the sectarian war in Iraq. I couldn't be in a place where there are others from the other side of Islam, even though I am not a religious, but they always identify you as a member of certain community. We have like names from what they consider as Shia names. We have Ja'far, we have Ali, we have Hussein, but we have Omar. I remember one of the, like I was still like so young. One of my father's friends who came to Mosul, and he's Shia. So my father introduced me and my other brothers to him. He said, "This is Omar," and he was kind of like, he didn't like this. Then my father introduced my other brother, whose name is Ali, and it's kind of like he hugged him. He was so happy, and then like we have another name, and then at the end, this friend of my father, he said, "How could Ali grow up with your other children?" Like my father told me, "We don't have this problem here." So this is one of the things. Like it became like part of. I have read many research or articles written about the arrival of ISIS in Mosul, but I've never read like someone writing about how this idea of caliphate that ISIS brought is related to something what's still going on in the city and in Iraq in general. What ISIS did, they touched a very sensitive issue in the city, that is the caliphate. It's just 1 century ago when the caliphate fell down. And till like the 40s, even like the 40s was still like extremely out of the Ottoman atmosphere or Ottoman historical atmosphere, but the city was still feeling its connection to be as the historian Dina Khoury called it, a Sunni castle to protect Islam, because in 1925 Mosul was also suggested to be a capital for the caliphate. This is more political, using history as a weapon. ISIS politically used the history to put it in this way, to tell the people who were like kind of like insulted for a very long time by the Iraqi government and by its sectarianism. Iraq had this history of sectarianism, the corruption within the government, all these social problems, the conflict between the urban and rural communities, this encounter inside the city. Also, it has to do with the roots of what Saddam regime did. So it all came and shaped itself in this new conflict. And it raised the question, is ISIS, or the so-called Islamic State, is ISIS the protection that we need or not? This was the question.
And did people think about that in terms of its religious legitimacy?
Of course, indeed. ISIS presented itself as a Sunni caliphate. They produced their ideology this way to deal with people based on their understanding of Islam. So the question wasn't that much about is ISIS good or bad, but it was, is this the right protection we need? If it is not, who is going protecting us?
And in that moment in 2014, the need for protection was felt both against, the state itself, a Shia-dominated state,
yeah,
and also against the West more broadly, or?
Of course, like the first level was against the central government and its corruption, whatever it was. It has lots of problems, but it also has to do with the East-West conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, it's irony that this way ISIS brought back Mosul to be in a global context again.
Right.
Like, we didn't want Mosul to be in this global context again this way. But we have to admit that Mosul was brought back to the global context as kind of like gained back its historical place, like its place in the history as it was before. Mosul was the heart of the Islamic world, it was the heart of the Zengid world, and then like was very, very important to the Ottomans because its conflict between the Iranian and the Safavids and the Ottomans.
Right.
So that's why I said in the beginning history is important, because this was the case.
Let me ask you, did you, like your friends at the time in 2014, did people have discussions about, the importance of the recreation of the caliphate, or, whether this movement was indeed a legitimate successor to the caliphate and should be supported? Like, was this something that actually took place in conversations among people you knew, and said that was given as a reason why people would support it, or?
Yeah. Well, at certain point, at certain time, it did. ISIS gained legitimacy and trust as it's a real representative of the Islam that the people wanted. But this was at certain level until ISIS changed its attitude, until ISIS became more against the society than to be supportive to them or than to be providing them with protection. Then the people started distinguishing between what is real Islam and what is not. Then they took ISIS from its legitimacy, from its authority, from its this kind of perception of trust and
they started
authority.
To question it, and
not just questioning it, but kind of they stopped this debate at this point that, well, ISIS was supposed to be the protection that we were waiting for, but it appears that it wasn't. So it's not. It has nothing to do with Islam. And here became another kind of argument, a different kind of argument.
What about in the brutalities committed by ISIS, and did people discuss those, and was it initially sort of seen as necessary for that very protection, but did people question whether those methods were appropriate or Islamic or legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, this is still one of the main arguments in the city is, do we need Sharia law? This is the question. And if we do, if we really need the Sharia law,
right,
is the Sharia law need to be like based on democratic basis? I mean, this is a very difficult question in the city. Your need of being ruled by Sharia law, but also when the Sharia law is being implemented in the city on the people, because it's very brutal. I mean, what ISIS did using the historical and Islamic text is unbelievable and unimaginable. We could never know about what happened centuries ago because we didn't have cameras at that time.
Right.
But at that time we lived it and we have cameras. So the question was, and actually it's still, to what extent do we need the Sharia law? And what kind of Sharia law do we need? Is it the, as they call it, the pure Sharia law that's been implemented by ISIS, or a different kind of Sharia law? And it also raised the question of what is extreme Islam and what is moderate. So this created this debate, like apart from all what happened from like these atrocities, but there was still intellectual discourse within the people. It's kind of like in closed circles, I know, but there was a debate.
I know that elsewhere you've suggested that at least for some period it would be useful to have an international force in Mosul,
I'm
right?
still
and
supporting this.
I mean, here in the United States, for many of us, the idea that a kind of an American-led military force could do something besides produce chaos and destruction, there hasn't been a lot of evidence in recent history. That is, so it makes us very worried about the possible outcomes of such occupation, even though on the other hand, you're facing, I take it, the dangers of a kind of sectarian explosion.
So I didn't address it as we need, like I didn't like identify it as we need American troops.
Right.
There is a good example of a successful international intervention in Bosnia. And I spoke to a lawyer, and he's a teacher of law in London now. He was involved, he's from Bosnia, he was involved in this and how the international protection provided or brought back peace there. What I was asking for, not an occupation, rather we would like to have international troops to help Iraqis, especially the young generation, to help Iraqis to live in peace for like few years, so they can rewrite the constitution in peaceful and protection situation. Also to kind of like empower the peaceful discourse in the city politically, and to help the Iraqis start the process to create their own democracy, not to import democracy from out. Democracy is not something you buy from the market. Democracy is something you develop yourself and something you experience. And I believe Iraqis now have the experience, but they need protection because.
Let me just add something there. That is, I mean, that makes good sense to me. But on the other hand, for everyone who's empowered, there's going to be someone else perhaps who feels disempowered and who will feel resentment that an outside force is sort of supporting certain parts of society against others who are feeling like left out of or...
Yeah, I mean, that's why Iraq in general, like Iraq as a whole, needs an international protection. But not troops, like, or saying like this is a US army or a British army. It's something like through the United Nations. It's also a good example for them, a good model for them to deal with Syria later. So why don't they start with Iraq? Syria is close to Iraq, and Iraq is like badly affected by what's happening in Syria.
Is there any discussion of this in Iraq itself? Like at the
I mean, as
level?
far as I know, and as far as I'm concerned with the Mosul elites, I know that most of the elites there are in this kind of discussion now, and they are supporting this idea. One of them was extremely against any international intervention in Iraq, but he thinks that it's the best way to really rebuild what was destroyed, not on like not in terms of buildings.
Yeah.
We need to build
the institutions and
an international discourse in the city that would lead to like a real transformation in Iraq. Yeah.
Well, I just want to ask you one last question. I know you've been involved in sort of efforts to rebuild educational institutions there, and particularly the university.
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit about what you've been focusing on, and do you see a kind of return of a certain sort of cultural and intellectual life to the city?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was, or it started with the library of Mosul University. When I found out like it was destroyed, I was extremely shocked, and I said it's the good beginning to bring back the role of the Mosul University, because it had and still have an essential role in rebuilding the city. So I focused on this library, and it was beautifully reconnected to the rest of the world. So Mosul was connected with the West, with other countries, through the library, through books. I'm doing this kind of like a global campaign, traveling a lot to gain more attention to the academia. But the final results I would like to have is to create open spaces for academics, so they can practice their knowledge, so they can have more opportunities to exchange knowledge with the West, not necessarily the West, but with the rest of the world, because knowledge shouldn't be restricted. And if we like keep waiting for the government to like rebuild itself and to finish this corruption and this bureaucracy, we'll wait for a century. So why don't we start now? And especially we have something really important in Mosul University. I was involved in this. It was established 2011. It's called the Unit for the Study of Orientalism. It was the only window for Mosul to the rest of the world. And there is like few results, good results, is that now we are waiting for 2 professors to visit this Unit for the Study of Orientalism, and this is the beginning. I believe that by the next 2 years, we will have at least 2 institutes out of the university authority. They have this independency, but they are kind of like producing knowledge, the knowledge that we really need, because the university has an important role in anywhere. Yeah.
All right, well listen, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you
it was
so
a pleasure.
much. Yeah.